Hi everyone, it's Ellie Mae with Swift Creek Customs, and today I have a step-by-step video on cutting HTV without a mat on your Siser Juliet or your Romeo cutting machine. This was a special request from someone, so I'm going to do the step-by-step video and show you tips along the way that will help you to be successful in your cutting process. So the first tip that I want to share with you is to measure your materials. So I'm going to grab my material. I'm going to be using a piece of the new Siser Aurora HTV. It doesn't really matter what kind of HTV you're using, but follow the directions from the manufacturer. So for instance, Siser HTV in this case is cut from the back side, so we'll take some steps to do that as we create our design. But I'm going to be doing the Siser Aurora in light blue, so I just grab a ruler to measure my material. You want to do this because not all materials are exact width, and you want to make sure that you're not going to run your design off of your material because you have a smaller width or piece of material than you think you do. So when you first open up your Leonardo Design Studio, this is what you're going to see. I simply click in the bottom left corner and I open my design tab. So for this demonstration, I'm going to be using a design that I've been wanting to cut for a while now. So I'm going to show you the entire process from when I downloaded it. Now I'm using a Windows computer. The process is just a little bit different for Mac users, but I'll explain that as we go along. So I'm going to open up where my file is saved to. So I have this file here, bring it onto my page. This is my design bundles folder that I saved to, and I'm going to be using this Mom Life Coffee Wine Repeat design. You can see here there's a little zipper on the folder. That means it is compressed, it is zipped. This is so that it is smaller sizes for your computer to be able to download. This is perfectly normal. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to right click on my design and I'm going to choose Extract All. Now, if you are on Windows 11 on your computer or even on Windows 10, sometimes they tend to hide the menus under More Menus. So if you do not see this little Extract All option, go down here to the Show More options and you want to look for that Extract All. So I am going to choose Extract All. It's going to ask me where I want to save it. So in this case, it's in the same folder. I'm going to click Extract, and then it's going to extract all those items. And if I scroll up and look for the folder without the zipper, it's going to show me that I have now this folder is opened. It's unzipped. So I'm able to access that file inside of it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you here. If I double click on it, I have currently a DXF, EPS file, a PNG file, and the SVG file. Now, Windows users, if your SVG files, if they show as an HTML file, I will put more information in the description below about this. That is perfectly normal. A Windows computer defaults to a web browser. So whatever web browser is the default on your computer, for instance, Microsoft Edge, or another web browser like Chrome, if you have not changed that on your computer, your SVG file will read here under type as an HTML file, and your icon here will show as your web browser icon. You can still utilize the file, you can still do that. I previously have been working all with SVGs in Silhouette Studio, so I had changed that to read all my SVGs with Silhouette Studio. I haven't changed it back yet, but you can simply just know that that's your SVG file. It's just how the Windows computer reads it. You can go over here back to the Leonardo Design Studio software. If I come here to File, and I can now choose Open with versions of 1.1.5 or higher. You can now access all your files under File Open, or you can choose File Import for an SVG file. So I'm going to just come up here to File Open, and then I'm going to navigate to that file. So back in my Design Bundles folder, and I'm coming over here to all the way down, Mom, Life, Coffee, Wine, Repeat. And then you'll see the file types that Leonardo Design Studio can open. So it could open the PNG file. If I wanted to do a print and cut, that would be ideal for me. Since I'm just going to do a cut, I'm going to go ahead and just double click on that SVG file. Now I can choose a couple options here. I could do a print and cut from the SVG file. I can do a cut only, or I can do editable artwork. Editable artwork would be as if I had a pattern or a design within the SVG file itself. That would be what you'd want to choose, but here you can, in reality, you can choose cut only or editable artwork. I'm simply just going to choose cut only. You're going to see the cut lines show up around that SVG file, and I'm going to choose next. Colors in use are black, and then it brings it in onto my design mat. Now, this is a complete personal preference on how large you scale your designs up. So for instance, typically I don't usually go over 10 inches for myself. I usually, for my husband who's a larger, he wears a 3X now, I don't go over the like 11.75 in width, just because he once told me he likes the design front center, doesn't like the design to go in his armpits or have people have to walk around him to see it. So completely up to you. Now I do need to change a couple things here because I'm going to be cutting HTV without a cutting mat. So I'm going to come up here to the artboard, and then I'm going to choose material roll. And then you're going to see that cutting mat disappear. Now I'm going to come down here to the properties, and I'm also going to change this. The lock is currently locked, so if I change the width or the height, one of them, it's going to proportionally change both. So if I were to choose this, let's set this width at 9.5. We'll go ahead and do that. See how that looks. Then it automatically changes the height proportionally as long as this little lock is closed. Now there's a couple things I want to point out here. I'm going to bring in another design to show you an example of something. So first let's go over to the Send tab. If I was just to send this, I have a few options here. You can choose how you want it to show up on your, how you want it to cut. If you're using a mat, you could tell it you want it to cut in a specific location. In this case, I'm not using a mat. I'm cutting it without a mat. So I'm just going to keep this move each color layer to origin, which means it's going to start in the exact position that I position the housing, the bottom left corner. So I'm going to click on Send. Now there's a couple things here. You're going to see your layers. I have one single solid black design, so it's only going to show one design mat. And then Leonardo Design Studio makes it really, really simple. You can choose this little button here called Mirror, and it will mirror your design for your HTV. It even tells you for heat transfer vinyl. Keep in mind some different specialty vinyls, such as some pattern vinyls, things like that, you may not need to mirror. For instance, Siser Easy Color DTV, you do not mirror. So you want to make sure you're following the directions for the specific material that you're using. So the next thing I want to point out here is this little auto weed box. So if I check that, it's going to put a blue box around my entire design. My entire design is all grouped as one piece, so it treats it as one solid design. So this is adding a box around it. But I also want to show you a little trick here. So I'm going to come out back here to Back to Design. I'm just going to come here and I'm going to make a copy, Control-C, Control-V, and I'm just going to use this as an example. So I'm going to make this a little bit smaller, and I'm going to place it in the top corner up here, just as an example of what you can do. And then what I'm going to do is come over here to Send Design. I'm going to hit Cancel. Something to note is if you have one design selected on your cutting mat area or cutting area, that is what it's going to show up on your Send Design tab. So if I click Send Design, you can see that only that object I have selected is going to be sent. You can either choose all artwork, and now all of the artwork will be sent, or you can simply hit cancel, click off of it to deselect everything, and then click send. So then it automatically defaults to all artwork. Just something to keep in mind. It happens to me a lot. I have something selected, so you can just choose this all artwork. And then I'm going to click send. Now I have two designs on my design mat. So what if they currently have this auto weed box around both of those designs. But what if I want a weeding box around each design? I'm going to uncheck this auto weed box. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on one design, and I'm going to press the letter X. And it's going to add a box around my design. And the neat part about this is that with individual weeding boxes, I can adjust those. So you can see that it's going into this design up here. I don't want that. And this is not going to be the best example. I can kind of move this over here, I think. Maybe we'll get away with it. Let's just make it smaller. Okay, so I just want to use it as an example. So now I have one weeding box around the large design. If I click on the smaller design and I choose X, it's going to add another weed box around the individual design. Now, the biggest tips here are the design. What you want the weeding box to go around has to be ungrouped from anything else. So if you have an entire design grouped together, it's going to go around the entire grouped design. You can adjust the weeding box in case your weeding boxes overlap, so you could adjust those as needed. But the letter X is your shortcut for adding individual weeding boxes. Now, I don't need this one up here. I'm just going to select it all and hit delete. And then this one still has its individual box around it. That should cut just fine. If I choose auto weed box, it's going to add another one on there. That's not what I want. I just need one. So we have our design. Now we're going to pop over. We're going to get Siser Juliet or Romeo. The same tips are going to work for both machines. I'm going to get it set up and show you exactly what I do. Okay, so I've brought in my Siser Aurora. I'm going to show you exactly what I do, starting from the beginning. So I'm just going to take my blade out, and Juliet is awake. I am going to measure the edge of my blade against the edge of my material. Now you want to keep in mind that your blade only needs to be out far enough to get through the layer that you want to cut. And what I mean by that is if I was to cut completely through a material, my blade needs to be just out enough to get through that material. Since I'm cutting HTV without a cutting mat, I am only cutting through the top layer, the back side of your HTV. I'm only cutting through the top layer, so I don't necessarily need it to be out the full extension to get through the entire material. And this looks like my blade is a little bit out too far. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to unscrew the gold locking nut, unscrew it just a little bit, and then screw that gold locking nut back in. So my blade is just barely showing, and it's going to be really hard to see on the screen. And then I can just hold that up next to my material. And I probably got it out too far. Unscrew it again, and the more you do this, the more you'll get used to it. And then just measure it against the material. If you're getting oddly shaped cutouts, hanging parts, or cutting completely through your material, then your blade depth is probably out too much. So once I have that, I'm going to install it. Make sure the lip on the blade is underneath this locking clip, and then tighten the screw there. Okay, so now when you go to load your materials, the position of your rollers is going to be dependent on the width of your materials. If I were to load it like this, you can see that it's not going to be underneath my rollers. So what I need to do is I'm going to position it in here. And I typically go by the load line on the left. And I can tell this edge is not completely straight, so I'm going to load it next to this line on the left. And then I'm going to have to move this roller over. So you can kind of see the position of where the rollers are. So you want a roller on each edge of your vinyl, and then you want the middle roller positioned as centered as possible. So if I pull this out, your rollers have to be positioned on this black grip section that's on this bottom roller bar. If they're not positioned on the grip part, it will cause your vinyl to lose grip or your mat to skew. So you want to make sure that the black roller part is on that grip area. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come around the camera. I'm going to turn this just a little bit so you can see it. I'm going to use both hands, one in front, one behind, and I'm going to slide my roller over to the right. Then I'm going to reposition my material, and I'm going to make sure that my roller is on my material. I'm going to move it over just a little bit more. So my left roller, which is hard to see behind the housing, is going to be on my material, and my right roller is going to be on my material. My middle roller, it could be positioned here or even further over. It just depends. You just want your material held securely. Once I have that, I'm going to push my materials all the way in, and I have my vinyl's a little bit curled, so that's going to cause, if it gets caught on anything, just work with that. So I'm going to position the straight edge, the left edge, over here next to the load line, and I'm going to flip the roller bar lever lock up. And then we're ready to go ahead and do our test cuts. Now, test cuts are one of the most important factors with these machines. If you can get used to doing a test cut, you'll become second nature with this, and you are going to save yourself a lot of frustration and a lot of headache. You'll be doing it without even thinking about it. So what I'm going to do first is I'm just going to move the housing. I'm going to position it at the bottom here. And then I'm going to use this cut settings here. I'm cutting Siser Aurora, which I'm going to choose the HTV, and I should be able to use the Easy Weed, but this is why you want to test cut. So it is a little bit thicker. I am going to increase this force up. Let's try an 8. And this is why you want to test. So you can increase the speed. 10 is just the default. I'm okay with that. I'm going to then push this little t-shirt button. I'm going to do a test cut and see how it weeds. Once it's done, push the correct button, and then go ahead and try to weed out that test cut. If you can see it. I can see it. Aurora is a little bit thicker, but this is just going to be dependent on your materials. Okay, so I don't think it cut very well, so I'm going to actually increase this up to a 15. And I think that's what's on the website. And then since it didn't cut, I can go ahead and I can cut it again in the same location, see what it's going to do, and I can always do another one. So that looks much better, but let's see. Oh yes. A little bit, my blade might be getting a little bit duller. So let's try one more time. The biggest thing is you don't want it to cut too deep. If you can feel the t-shirt design, it might be cutting a little bit too deep, but in this case, it's not quite. So 15, I think the range, if I remember right, I'll put up the link in the description below, was 15 to 20 for Aurora on the website. So let's go ahead and try at an 18. I move the housing over. And your cut settings are going to be dependent on your materials and also your blade life, how much you've cut. And I've been cutting quite a bit, and I can't actually remember. It's been a week or so since I cut, so I'm not sure what I was cutting before with this. So it does weed. It's a little bit tough. So I'm going to increase that just a little bit more, but I can get, it's a clean cut. It's just this Aurora is just a little bit different of a material. So I'd rather use a small bit of materials down here than waste a whole sheet of this. So I'm going to increase that. Let's try 21. T-shirts. And then once I have my settings dialed in for this particular material, I can cut and cut and cut and won't be a problem. Okay, so that looks like it cut easy, even though I cut over top of the same. So that is what the force setting I'm going to go with for this time. Again, I can't remember what I cut with my blade last time. Another tip is to keep separate blades for your materials. So I have one blade for my HTV and my vinyl, and then I have another blade for my cardstock, because your materials do dull the blade at different rates, just like having separate scissors for fabric versus paper. So I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to position the housing. And what I want to do first is I'm going to pop back over into my software. I want to see where this design sits in this corner. Did I use the area where it needs the design to cut, or do I have a little bit of space in this area? And then I want to show you a neat feature over there in the software. So let's pop back over. Okay, so what I was referencing on the other video is my test cuts are down here in this bottom left corner. I just want to make sure that my design isn't going to cut through there, which means I can position my housing directly in the bottom left corner of my material. So I will be good to go with this cut. Now, there's one other thing that I want to show you. So in here, I have this little button called Area Test. And if I press this, I'm going to switch the camera as fast as I can. The Area Test is going to do an area test around where my design and weeding box will cut. This is another way you can save materials so that you're not wasting them in case the design is going to cut off that material or you happen to not measure correctly, which happens to us all. So I'm going to click this little area test and switch the camera back over. It's going to ask me for the dimensions. Do I want to perform this? I'm going to click yes and then switch. And you have to be really, really quick because Juliet and Romeo are very, very quick. So you want to pay close attention to that and where it cut. If you need to do it again, go ahead and do it again because you're not wasting any materials. The area test does not drop the blade, so you're not actually cutting anything. So I am going to actually move this down here to the left corner and over a little bit because I cleared that area on my design. There's no part of the design that's going to cut in this test cut area, so I am good to go. So let's pop back over to Leonardo and we'll send this to cut. Okay, so just double check that all your settings are good. I have a Siser standard blade. I am going to be using the cutter settings. So I have the little box checked here because I already did my test cuts with the Siser Juliet touchscreen. All of those are set up. It's all good to go. I've done my area test. I've done my test cuts. I verified that it's not going to cut through, and I have my design on the screen. So I'm going to go ahead and click send to cutter. I'm going to choose yes, and we'll switch over. And I do have this set at a cut speed of 10. I could have increased that to a 13. With this design and particular material, it would not have been an issue. It would have cut no problem. Although there is a neat little feature here. If I were to choose pause, I could bump this up to a 13 when I hit play again, it actually increases the speed. Personally, I don't do it because I forget, and speed 10 is pretty fast anyhow. So I just let it do its thing. You want to make sure that your materials are not hitting anything in front or behind. If you can hear that little sound, it's the vinyl, the curled part of the vinyl. It is catching on something in the back, but it's not affecting the feed of it. So a couple things to look for if your vinyl is not feeding correctly. You want to make sure those rollers are on those black grippy areas. You want to make sure your vinyl is completely flat. See, that was pretty quick. Completely flat, that there's no buckling in between, and you want it to be as smooth as possible. If you end up with buckling and you loaded your materials completely flat, you want to check your cut settings, because if your cut settings are too deep, that could cause buckling too. Most often we are seeing the misfeeds of an alignment or offcuts because the rollers are not on those black grippy areas of the roller bar. So just keep that in mind. Now what we're going to do is I'm going to, you can push the button, or I just reach over and I flip the unload button. And I have my design, which you can't see. But what I'm going to do is I am going to time lapse this, and I'll show the weeding process, and then we'll get to pressing. So let's change that camera view over. Now, a couple things I want to mention here is you do want to make sure to get all your little centers out. So you want to double check that all your pieces get cut out. I do want to mention that my weed box actually didn't cut in the process of me showing you the individual weeding boxes versus the auto weed. The weed box didn't stick. So in this case, it wasn't a big deal. I just used my scissors and cut around it. But I wanted to show you both ways to do that auto weed box. And then I just took my time. This Siser Aurora is a little bit thicker of a material. It's just going to depend on your actual material. HTV in general is the same steps that you do. So just take your time weeding, make sure you get all these little pieces. So now we'll speed this back up while I do the centers. And the other thing I want to mention is I'm kind of frugal. This stuff is so pretty. This is a pretty large area. What I'll do is I'll save this carrier sheet and I'll restick it to the carrier sheet, and then I might save it and use it for another future project for a scrap. It may seem very tedious, but in reality, I'm not out anything if it doesn't work, because most people would just toss the extras anyhow. You know, there's some pieces in here that are too small to use, but I could get a little design out of that. So mermaid tail, well, I mean, it's just so pretty. It's really hard to catch that on the video or in a photograph, but I'm going to keep it. Yeah, you can judge me for that if you want. And then just double check your design. So that looks good. I am actually going to go back to my design and just double check that this little piece is supposed to be there, just to make sure. So I'll be right back. And yes, that little piece is supposed to be there. It's part of the ribbon here for your circle, your cycle that goes around. So it may look out of place against the cup, but that little piece is supposed to be there. It's in the design. So then what I'm going to do is I'm going to switch over the camera view, and I'm going to show you how to quickly press this. Okay, so here is my brand new Siser heat press that I picked up at Michael's after I got back from the Detroit office. This is actually my first press on this machine, so I'm doing it live on camera. I have it set for 305. You can see it came up just a little bit. Usually with a heat press, it's pretty normal to see that it go up a little bit, and then it kind of turns it off and brings it back down. It's kind of the same as an oven. If you've ever noticed how your oven works, it brings it up to temperature, sometimes you can hear it kick off, and then it drops it until it has to then warm up again. So now it's dropped down to 304. What I'm going to do first is with Siser Aurora, it does recommend that you do a pre-press, and then the biggest thing you want to watch for, again, read your manufacturer settings for your actual particular heat transfer vinyl that you're using. In this case, I'm using this fabulous Siser Aurora that is pretty new. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pre-press this. Pre-pressing does two things. First, the pre-press is going to help to get any moisture out, but it's also going to allow me to test the pressure. With Siser Aurora, they say medium pressure. You can see there is no pressure at all. This press is out of the box. So I'm going to increase the pressure a bit. That's too much. That's a little bit loose. So there we go. I have my timer set for 15 seconds. It just needs a quick pre-press. Now I'm going to see how this design fits. Now this press here is a 9x12, so I'm not sure if my design will fit this way. Does my design fit? Doesn't fit. So all that means is that I'm going to have to do 2 presses, which is no problem. I did get this press for doing smaller projects. So, but I wanted to use it for this video too. So it can be done. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure that my shirt is in there where I want it to be. The Siser Aurora does have a sticky backing on it. So that makes it easy to put it onto your shirt, position it, and then to lift it up and see how it looks. Most times I just eyeball it, which means that it's usually crooked. But even if I spend all the time in the world trying to get it straight, it's still usually crooked. So this one, I'm going to just lay down here, away from my heat press, so I don't burn myself on camera, and turn you a little bit. And then I'm going to position my design. So I have folded both edges to get the center point, and then I can kind of crease my carrier sheet. Make sure my shirt and I guess if you see this shirt in a future video, you can tell me whether I got it on crooked or not. That looks a little bit too far. Again, I could spend all day trying to get this right, and I'm trying to work within the camera view, so sometimes it makes it even more. So let's see how that looks. Well, that looks pretty good to me. I do see this little piece down here. I want to make sure that I get it out from underneath so it doesn't accidentally press. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to position it as much of it on the press as possible. I might get lucky. Ooh, guess what, guys? Just this little tiny bit. There's a little tiny bit at the top. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure that this tag is out of the way. I'm going to make sure all of the top is on the press. And then I'm going to press that. Siser Aurora is a cold peel, so keep that in mind. Follow your manufacturer's directions. And let's see, I might be able to position this. Ooh, I might get lucky here. No, not quite. It's okay. 2 presses, happens all the time. What I do like about this press so far is that it heated up really, really quickly. In the office at the Siser headquarters, it was like, I always just use a cover sheet. just 10 minutes maybe. So I'm just going to do that. So I'm going to press this, and I'm going to probably press it for about mostly the full time. Might as well. It'll be okay. And then let's see if it beeps. It does beep. Okay. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to move it up. I'm going to press the bottom down here to make sure. Again, Siser Aurora is a cold press, so I'm going to have to cool it off a little bit before I can actually peel that carrier sheet off. And they told us a trick, which I didn't grab one today, but if you have a cookie sheet, you can use that as your cooling surface. For me, I'm just going to take this, and you can kind of shake it out, and then you could lay it down on your surface. So I'm going to let that cool. I'll speed up the video while it's cooling, and then we'll come back and we'll see how I did. Okay, it just took a couple seconds for it to cool down enough. You just want to go slow to make sure that it's there. If it didn't press all the way, then you could give it another quick press to get it to stick. Good thing it's working since I'm live on camera. You never know what's going to happen. Okay. And if you are feeling like you want to give it another press, since Aurora is textured, you are not going to really see the texture weave of your shirt through Aurora because of its texturing and its surface. So if you feel like it, you could just give it another quick short press with your cover sheet. Just do another 5 seconds. Lift it up a little bit more to the bottom. Cover sheet's protecting it. There we go. Okay, I'm going to carefully peel that cover sheet off. Ta-da! Awesome. Now, Aurora is one of the prettiest vinyls I've seen, but it is so hard to get this sheen and the color changing on camera. Okay, so now we have done a heat transfer vinyl cut without a mat, step by step with the Siser Juliet. All of the same tips apply to the Siser Romeo machine. He's just a little bit larger, can cut a little bit wider. If you're doing HTV designs, that would be wider than that, or multiple HTV designs at the same time. All of the same tips apply. So you have quite a few options. Leonardo Design Studio makes it very, very simple to do your test cuts right here on the actual machine, and then the area test as well to save you on your materials. You also got to see Siser Aurora in action. Hopefully that comes through on the video. And it's really, really awesome. So I'll be wearing that in future videos. And you got to see the first press on my new Siser press. It worked, no problem. Multiple presses, not an issue. So if you have any questions, let me know in the comments below. I will put additional resources in the links in the description below that I mentioned previously in the video. I thank you for joining me. Hope you like, subscribe, and click that bell for notifications to receive future updates on videos I post on the Swift Creek Customs YouTube channel. Thank you. Have a great day.